Right, so today I'm joined by Daniel Spain. Daniel is in sunny California, although it is 5 a.m. You've just informed me, Daniel. So thank you so much for getting up so early to
Yeah,
do
no
this
problem.
podcast. So Daniel, you're a full-time working dad, and I had the pleasure of talking to your wife Haley a few weeks ago. So I think by the time this podcast goes live, Haley's will already be live. And
Awesome.
you're both from my point of view, a very seemingly together couple. You're both working full time. You both have jobs you really enjoy. You have two young kids, two cats, a new puppy, and a lizard. So it's
Yeah,
a pretty
it's a
busy
lot.
household. Pretty busy
It's a
household.
lot.
But it seems like it all runs and it all works. So I think maybe the first thing that you can just tell us a bit more about is how. How does it all work when you have all of this going on?
Yeah, sheer tyranny of will, like I feel like so often that's true, right? Like you can't it's so chaotic that it's like really hard to get anything like locked down or plan for much.
Mm,
But I feel like over the years Haley and I have been able to like build just like a sense of trust and like reliance on like how the other person would judge a situation or how we would
mm,
act in any given situation, and we just do the best we can. I think it's very stressful. I've had to uh, go on finasteride to keep my hair from falling out, and there's a lot of things
mm,
going on, but yeah, it's good. I think Haley and I both have like pretty diverse backgrounds and didn't necessarily think that we were going to end up like in the corporate world the way that we
okay.
both have.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that that kind of informs, not only like how we approach work, but how we approach being parents,
Mm,
like
mm,
professional parents, is
yeah.
that
Yeah.
um, we just try to take things as they come and do the best we can. We both lived abroad, and that I think teaches you to, be a little bit more flexible and think on your
Mm,
toes,
mm, mm,
and yeah, it
mm,
it works. Like I said, it's chaotic, and we spend lots of nights like talking about like, okay, what's the way that we should do this, and do we handle this okay? And
yeah. Yeah.
thankfully I have a really solid therapist that I've been seeing for 5 years or so, and
Mm.
we work through a lot of that stuff, and yeah,
And that's an
kind of
interesting
just
point, actually.
make it happen.
I think it's getting more accepted here, I guess. But I suppose therapy has always been quite an integral part of American life, hasn't it? I think it's never been sort of shied away from, and people are happy to talk about having a therapist.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think it has a lot of the same stigmas, right? Or like some of the
Mm,
same like people are a little bit like more ashamed to talk about it or reluctant to get the help, that they maybe need. But it's definitely getting better. I
yeah.
think like as our healthcare system started covering it, which is only very recently,
Okay.
like
Mm,
with the Affordable Care Act, excuse me, Obamacare,
yeah. Oh, yes. Yes, indeed. Remember that one.
more
Yeah.
colloquially.
Yeah.
Um, One of the provisions in there was that insurance companies had to cover mental health services. And
Okay.
so prior to that, it was like if you had a really nice insurance plan, maybe they would cover that.
Mm,
Otherwise,
mm,
you're paying out of pocket, and it's like $200 a session, and if you're like not uh, you know, super affluent or you believe in that like
mm,
wholeheartedly, you're pretty
mm,
reluctant to get that help.
yeah. Yeah.
But post Obamacare, it's included in all of our insurance plans, and
Okay.
so it's more widely available to people. And then I think as time goes on and uh, you know the benefits of having a therapist are like more widespread, it's becoming more and more like accepted, I guess
Yeah.
is maybe the right word. But
Yeah.
um, it's the best thing that's ever happened for me. I think
Mm,
I'm in a really high pressure job. I'm in software sales,
mm,
and that's really taxing on like your emotional
yeah.
well-being. And actually, yeah, I Haley had a lot to do with me like going to see someone, and I had like um tiptoed around it for a while. Like I tried to go to a certain therapist, and just to like work through some of that stress and anxiety
Mm,
and stuff. I
mm,
have like pretty serious anxiety and obsessive compulsive disorder. So
mm,
that's like
mm.
had gone undiagnosed for a really long
Right.
time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And right after our son was born, it's like driving home from work one day and had like a full on panic attack. Like was driving home, didn't have like I had no idea where I
Mm,
was while I was
mm,
driving on
mm.
a road that I drive twice a day,
Yeah,
every
yeah,
day for
yeah.
3 years. Um, and I had never had like a panic attack or an anxiety attack before. And I called Haley up, and she really quickly recognized what was happening because she had kind of had those earlier in her life.
Mhm.
And so she talked me through it. And then once I kind of like got home, was like calmed down, like, it passed. She was like, you just really have to like commit to finding,
Yeah.
a therapist that you like
Mm,
and that you are comfortable talking
mm.
to. And so I did. So I went through like our insurance portal system and found Dr. Levy, and that was 5 years ago.
Okay.
And yeah, I've been seeing him ever since. And it's, in sales, like I'm a sales manager now, so I
Mm.
have 15 or so um, individual contributors that report into
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
And day one, when I meet with them, when they come on board my team, I always recommend them like, hey, if you're like cool with it, which you should be, because
Mm.
it's like,
Mm, yeah,
the best
absolutely.
thing ever, like you should really, look into getting a therapist,
Mhm.
especially
Mm.
again, especially because the job that, and Haley's in sales as well, like it's such high pressure, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
very like taxing on your yeah, like on your ability to like process things. And so that's been amazing. And I feel like that having like a unbiased third party to talk to, not only about work or my relationship with Haley,
Mm,
but really
mm.
about my kids,
Yeah, yeah,
is really, really helpful. There's like so much information out there these days, like on the internet, and
yeah. Too much.
there's yeah,
Conflicting.
it's so crazy. Exactly. It's
Mm.
like, okay, my kid swore at me, right? Like he used the F word, and it's like, okay, you have to like nip that in the bud from one mommy blog, and
Yeah.
then the other one's like, well, no, you need to have a 30-minute conversation with him about the severity and strength of that word, and then it's okay to use that word as
Mm,
long as you
mm.
really mean. And it's like, which way is up?
Yeah.
And so I feel like a lot of um our success, or I mean, I guess we'll see later on down the road how
Mm,
successful we
mm.
were, but our sanity, I think,
Yeah.
comes from just knowing that we all we can do is be ourselves and try our best. And
Yeah.
some people will agree with that and some people won't, but
Mm,
if as long
mm.
as it's, good for us, we feel good about it.
Yeah, and it's your own, your family is entirely unique to you. It's entirely personal to you. Nobody else can tell you what decisions to
Yeah.
make or what to think about your family. But as you say, I think the overuse of the Google world we live in, which can be exceptionally overwhelming, taking that away and
Yeah,
actually talking to someone, as you said, unbiased, whether that's a therapist or a coach or whatever, that gives you the space to think for yourself, but in a safe and
totally.
sort of guided environment, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's like WebMD, right? Do you guys have the equivalent of
Yeah,
that
similar.
in
Yeah,
the UK, right?
yeah.
So it's like, okay, I have a little pain in my lower back. And so you Google that and you go down the WebMD rabbit hole, and
Yeah,
you arrive at, I have terminal cancer,
yeah,
and
yeah.
I've got a week to live.
Mm, mm.
I feel like it's so easy to do that as a parent too,
Yeah,
right? It's like, okay, there's this one behavior that I'm observing, and you Google that and you go down the rabbit hole, and it's always, worst case scenario. And then
yeah,
you
yeah.
start trying to assess what's going on by yourself. And, the mind is a really powerful tool. And yeah, I think sometimes you kind of arrive at conclusions that aren't necessarily there. Like I remember when Haley and I first had Tulloch, our son, he's
Mm.
5 now, which is crazy. Um, he was like maybe 6 months old, like maybe just starting to like
Mm.
crawl and get towards toddling. And I remember I can't remember specifically what it was, but something happened, and we were like, all right, we're doing an autism test, right? Like your at home autism test. And like, is that really necessary at
Mm,
that
mm.
age? Like maybe, but it's like it's just two of us, like, more or less idiots sitting in our kitchen at 11 o'clock at night watching garbage reality TV, trying to do our own autism
So,
assessment. And it's like, let the professionals
yeah, maybe
deal with
maybe that
that.
kind
And
of thing is better to seek professional advice.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
And then I talked to Haley, and obviously from the American side of things, the support that you get as a working parent in your companies.
Yeah.
She has found a very, very supportive, family-centric company, and it sounds like that's similar to you. Is that something that's becoming more common in the US, or is there still quite a, I suppose, a
Yeah.
gap between those kind of companies?
It's really interesting. I think it really depends on the company that you work for, because uh, like from a legislature perspective, it's there's no like uniform answer, right? Like most of that happens on each individual state level. My orange cat is coming out right
Oh,
now
here's the cat.
because,
That's fine.
yeah,
Want some
dog goes
attention.
away. Exactly. Eating this corner of my computer. He might make a surprise appearance. So if he does, I apologize.
That is fine.
Um, but yeah, I think most things are decided on the state level. There's like
Mm,
the federally mandated requirements for maternity and paternity leave are fairly like minimal. Like they exist, but they're
yeah,
very
yeah.
minimal. And so it comes down to like not only what state you live in terms of what companies have to do, but
Mm,
really the mindset behind the company. And there's a really great book um, by the founder and former CEO of Patagonia, like the
mhm.
apparel brand,
Okay, yeah.
called "Let My People Go Surfing." It's kind of like a combination of his like business strategy and like ideals when it comes to like running a
Mm,
business,
mm,
um, as well as like a manual on how to just like run an efficient business. But a large part of that book centers around like just the idea of running a company differently
yep.
and with like a more people focused mindset. And their company was like one of the very first to implement like on-site daycare, and so they're very like
Okay. Mm,
progressive in terms of
mm,
like how they deal with parents. And so I think that that's becoming more like in vogue for companies, especially when they're based in California. We tend
yeah.
to be pretty progressive out
Okay.
here.
Yeah.
um, but it's also very different for men as opposed to women.
Mm,
So
mm,
there are requirements in terms of like paid and unpaid leave for women, but for men it's a lot different. It's, I mean, again, it exists, but it's very minimal. And I think companies are, I don't know like the right way to say it, but uh they don't really like consider that. Like I think a lot of companies, even progressive ones, still have this like outdated mindset of
mm,
being a dad, right? Like of fatherhood, where it's
yeah.
like, okay, my wife's giving birth and I'm outside the doors and people are running back and forth relaying what's happening, and I'm
Yeah.
smoking a cigar when
Mm,
my
mm.
wife is in labor. And that's
Waiting in
just
the
not
pub.
yeah, exactly. Like that's just not the reality. But I think a lot of companies still have that mindset, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, oh well, you're gonna help out minimally and then get back to work.
Mm, mm,
um and I actually, I'm sure Haley referenced it when you guys were chatting a few weeks ago, but that's what happened to me when I like when Tulloch was born. Is
mm,
I didn't have um, a lot of the protections or the like paid time off available to me, and it's partially my fault, right? Like when we first found out Haley was pregnant, I had been in my job for 2.5 years, and it felt like, hey, I got that itch to try something new, and
yeah.
and there wasn't really like a pathway forward to career advancement.
Mm,
And
mm,
this opportunity to do some consulting work, and kind of build out a sales and marketing team fell in my lap
yeah.
just by chance. And we had kind of gone back and forth on whether or not it was going to be the right decision, and ultimately decided like, yeah, I should go for it. So I did.
Mm,
um, and I worked there for probably 8 months or so, like during the majority of Haley's pregnancy.
yeah. Yeah.
And it was coming towards the holidays, and I had been working this gig, and it was very seasonal. It was very like a seasonal in terms of like business and
Mm,
how busy or slow it was. It was tied to like the wedding industry. So we were coming towards like the end of wedding season, and the impending birth of my son was on the horizon. I was like, I just don't trust this to
yeah.
be sustainable, especially when like I'm responsible for somebody else.
Mm,
So I had made a tough decision to leave that gig, and then because of how close I was to having Tulloch, I was like, I just want to go back to something that I know and
yeah.
I feel comfortable in. So I went back to my old job,
Mm.
and my thankfully my company was like very grateful to have me back, and so they
Took you
like
back with open
made some
arms.
things happen. Yeah. I started getting texts from all of my old team being like, "You're coming back. That's amazing." The CEO like sent me
Yeah.
a personal email, which was great. But when I started, which the day that I started was, I think Haley went in. We had a scheduled C-section on a Thursday, and I started the Wednesday before that. Like immediately before, so the
Immediately.
day
Yeah, right, the day
before,
before.
yeah, I like went in, got my computer all set up, and then pieced out, to go have my son. Um, they told me like straight out, like, you don't have any paid time off,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
or you don't have any paternity leave because you're only eligible after you've been here for a year, and
Right.
because you left and came back, you forfeited that. And so my boss actually was like, "Okay, like, you need to be back on Monday." And I was like, "Okay." So Haley like
Weekend.
had us. Yes, yeah, exactly. So Haley had her C-section on Thursday. We were in the hospital until Sunday. Went home, got set up, and I started work on Monday. I didn't really have any
Yeah.
options,
Mm,
and
mm.
that's really scary. I mean, it's scary, but also just like really inconvenient and like kind of like a bummer, right? Like
Yeah. Quite
and we didn't have,
understatement, I would
honestly,
suggest, but yeah.
yeah, of the year. But like and our Tulloch's birth was like not super easy. Like
Yeah.
Haley, he was a massive child, right? Like he was almost 10 pounds,
Oh,
and
really?
Haley's
Oh, wow.
not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So we like, yeah, this is gonna go down a weird rabbit hole, but I hope that's
yeah.
okay. Like,
Carry on.
um, yeah, like it. So we're like talking to the our OBGYN, and through the whole pregnancy, I was like, "So how big do you think this baby's gonna be?" And he's like, "Oh, no, not big, 7 pounds maybe,
Yeah,
easy,
yeah,
easy peasy."
yeah.
And I was like, "Are you sure?" Like, because Haley's stomach is huge.
Mm,
She,
mm, mm.
all belly, beautiful, beautiful belly, of
Mm,
course, but yeah, all belly. And so our son was a week late. So like the due date came and
mm,
went,
mm.
and we went in for our scheduled induction, I guess I should
Yep,
say. So we
yep.
go in, it's like 5 a.m. And they broke her water just to like try to get things to
Yep,
progress
yep.
naturally.
Mhm.
She done like a lot of research on natural childbirth, and she was really gonna like
Mm.
give it the college try naturally.
Yeah.
And after that happened, it was like maybe 7 or 8 hours. Nothing was really progressing. So they gave her Pitocin, and
Mm, mm.
that didn't get much progressing. So
Yeah,
like
yeah.
after about 24 hours of that process, and she eventually got an epidural. She
Mm,
she went
mm.
really late into that, and actually was
Yeah.
on like Pitocin for 3 or 4 hours, I think, before she got the epidural, which, contractions are way more
Mm,
intense
mm.
after Pitocin, after you're like,
Yeah.
chemically
Mm.
induced. And she really, really went for it, but, things happen,
No.
and
Yeah.
she, decided to get the epidural, which is
Yeah,
great.
yeah.
Um, and right around like the 24-hour mark, she started to get a fever, and they were
Mm.
like, "Hey, like we don't want to let this progress naturally anymore.
Yeah.
Like we
Yeah.
want to make sure that there's not an infection, so we're gonna
Mm.
do the C-section." So okay, cool. They do that, but because she has a fever, they basically like took our son immediately and like
Mm,
put
mm.
him into the NICU in the hospital, just to make sure that he wasn't born with an infection.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
she still had a fever, so it was like so traumatic,
Mm.
because it's kind of not going the way that you expect. And so um and it's like the middle of the night, right? It's like 1 o'clock in the morning, so like no one's on
20
the phone
24
telling me
hours
what to
later.
do. Yeah, so I'm like, and so like her recovery room and the NICU are like 3 floors apart. So
Mm,
I
mm.
felt like I was in like a Ben Stiller movie, where I was like rushing around frantically and things were lighting on fire. I was like
Oh,
upstairs checking on him, down checking on Haley, and then
yeah,
she
yeah.
ended up um having some issues like getting the bleeding to stop after her
Mm, mm.
C-section. So like it was just craziness
Yeah,
happening
yeah.
on both sides of the
Everywhere.
spectrum. And by the time she was stable and okay, and our
Mm,
son
mm.
was good, and like actually we got to like have him in the room with
Yeah,
us. It was
yeah.
like 3 o'clock in the morning on Friday.
Mm.
And I wake up in the morning very like tired and groggy, and realize
Mm.
like, oh crap, in 3 days, like 2 days
2 day,
time, I
yeah.
have to be back in the office, and back to work. And that was terrifying. Like,
Yeah, not
absolutely
surprised.
terrifying. And you like first time fatherhood, especially, like you
Mm,
don't really know what to expect. And
yeah, yeah.
if uh me after the birth of our daughter, which is a very different experience,
Mm,
both in terms of the labor and effort and all that stuff, and then what was afforded by my now current company, my
yeah,
new company,
yeah.
are very different. But if I could go back in time and like talk to myself like in that
Mm,
moment,
mm,
um there are worse things that could have happened. Like I feel like with dads, like immediately following birth, like you're not really that relevant to the, like, aside from like support
yeah, I
for
was going to
Haley,
say
which
quite
uh,
relevant when it comes to emotional support.
totally. And
Yeah, yeah.
Haley had a C-section, so like physical
Mm,
support. But
yeah, yeah.
I think very, very foolishly, maybe, like now, um given the luxury of hindsight, like
Mm,
I
mm,
realize all that, right? That like that
yeah,
really is
yeah.
your role as a father, like in those first couple weeks, is like
Mm,
you're there to support your wife or your partner, and make
yeah.
sure that they have the things that they need, and that they're supported both emotionally and
Mm,
physically in their recovery, and that they get to spend as much time as possible with the kid.
yeah.
I think back then I was expecting this crazy, glitter and lightning moment where I just had this like insane connection with my kid.
Mm,
And honestly, like that, when that didn't happen, and, like it took a while. I went through like a period where I was like, oh man, is there something wrong? It's, again,
yeah,
it's that
yeah,
like
yeah.
same rabbit hole
Yeah,
of like,
absolutely. Yeah.
am I doing something wrong? Like, is it something, can
Mm,
I do
mm,
better? And I guess that's kind of like the double-edged sword of like self-assessment too, right? Is like with anything these days, like you could spend a lot of time on the internet. And
yeah.
I tried to prepare for our having kids, like reading books, and
Mm.
someone gave me this book. It's called Dude, You're Gonna Be a Dad, right? And
Oh
it's
yeah,
like,
there are similar ones. Yeah.
yeah,
Oh
right.
yeah,
It's like,
yeah,
oh, the hip, cool, edgy approach to being a dad.
yeah.
And even there, um, to bring things kind of full circle to the chaos and
Mm,
like, who Haley and I are as
yeah,
parents
yeah.
and people. It's like, I'm reading this book, and, it uses borderline, you know, um, what's the right word? Bad language, right? Like I
Oh
think
yeah,
it says
yeah.
piss and crap
Because it's
and
cool,
things like that.
obviously,
Yeah, yeah,
to
it's
have that
so
in the
hip.
song.
Yeah, it's so edgy.
Uh,
But it basically, um, talks about fatherhood in terms of like convincing a dad that it's worthwhile, right? That it's like
yeah.
you got to be invested, and you got to be there for the birth, and you got to,
Mm,
it's rough, and you got to show up. And that was never my mindset or approach, right? Like, going into it, I was like, I want to be there for everything, and like I want to
yeah,
be,
yeah.
supportive and empathetic and all of that.
Mm, mm,
And I think what's really interesting and what I really love, seeing, is that old stigma start to like fade away, right?
yeah,
And these like
yeah,
very classical gender roles and ideals about what it means to be a father.
mm,
Those kind of like ideals are starting to melt away, like,
yeah,
as you know um honestly, like a lot of like the gender binary ideals and progress is being made in our country, I
mm,
think,
mm, mm.
as those lines start to get blurred in a very also positive way, like the roles in parenting are starting
Yeah,
to get
absolutely.
blurred and accepted, right? Like I think a few years ago, if you would have said like, yeah, I'm going to be a stay-at-home dad, and my wife's a professional and she's going
Mm,
back to work,
mm,
and I'm going to be the one that's handling things at home, like
mm,
a lot of guys would look at you and be like, what? Like, what are you talking about?
mm.
But that's becoming more and more common. And I think leaving room for flexibility in different family situations and work situations is like never a bad thing, right? Like inclusivity and
Yeah, yeah, of course.
open-mindedness and
Mm,
is a
mm,
really, really solid thing.
mm.
Again, like I think Haley and I probably have it a little bit better just in terms of that by living in California, because
Yeah.
we're like, again, we're like really progressive on the
Mm,
coast. It tends to be that way.
mm.
Um, Even though like the actual like city and county that we live in is
Have a
like,
little visitor. Hi.
oh, what's up, dude? You want to meet Aisha? This is
Probably,
your
is it
mommy's
too early? He's
cousin. They live in
just
England.
just woken up.
Yeah. Oh, and
Might
he's
not be
punching my hand.
quite up for meeting yet.
Yeah. Hey, dude. Look here. This is case in point,
This is
right?
real
Like,
life. This is
this
real
is
life.
especially during the pandemic. This
Yeah,
happens 10 times a day.
it does.
Hey, dude, can you go ask mom to get you set up? Because I'm being interviewed. I'm talking to Aisha. This is your mom's
Hi.
cousin.
I know because I said, Mama, can you come get me a thing? And she won't even do it.
Oh, can you go rouse her a little bit more? Can you be a little bit more energetic and trying to get her to help you out? I'm being recorded. Thank you. Love you, pal.
Now he's going to go and shake his poor mother awake.
Yeah, sorry. Everything I just said before, erased.
It's all just chaos.
Yeah, let your mom handle that. I'm
Yeah.
working. But yeah, like our actual city that we live in, and our county, really, like Orange County, was like got Reagan elected governor, right? Like, it's
Yeah.
very conservative, and so I think that causes like a really interesting dynamic. But again, I think like a lot, especially like in the workplace, and like some of those and in regards to like parenting and familial roles and all that, like it is starting to be more widespread in terms of like people being more open-minded to different things. So,
but what's the actual reality of it? So I think it's great that people are paying not lip service but embracing it more. But if you were a stay-at-home dad, for example, or
yeah,
a dad who has the kids for the day, and you go out looking for activities, someone told me recently, again an American, that it tends to be lots of mummy and me or mommy and me classes, and the representation isn't actually there. So although it's being talked about, it's quite hard to actually find more dad-centric things to do.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So again, like there are mandates like from a federal level on like what you get in terms of like your support from your workplace, right? And the amount of time that you're able to take off with job protection, that's like where it first starts, right? It's like, okay, if you take time off, is your job secure? And that's what like the government is most concerned with, right? That like, okay, I had a kid, I'm going to take off 2 weeks, and then I'm not going to get fired because I'm taking those 2 weeks off.
Yeah.
That's the first thing. And I think I'm pretty sure in California, it's 2 weeks or maybe it's 6 weeks that you can take time off and you're protected from your job.
Father or mother? Father.
I believe it's for the father too. I think mother, it's like 6 months. It's like, it's a lot longer.
Yeah.
Men it's 6, or father is 6 weeks.
Okay.
But only 2 of that is like guaranteed paid, right? So it's like, okay, I can take 6 weeks off and still have my job. But the reality for a lot of families is like, Haley and I were like dual income families, and back then when we had our son or we had Birdie, like if I went 6 weeks without getting paid, like that would be really financially tough for us. And so that really comes down to the company deciding like, okay, how much do we want to value the father in this situation, and how much how long we want to give them. Again, in my second situation, I was really, really fortunate where I took, and I kind of like timed it differently, where when Tulloch was initially born, I took 2 weeks, like 2 weeks paid. Or sorry, when Birdie was born, 2 weeks paid. And so I was there to like help out, like we had chatted about, with like the support and helping her get back on her feet and all of that. Then I went back to work for another 2 weeks. And then the following month, I took the entire month off.
Okay.
Like,
well, that's great.
A full month. Yeah. And my company was, we have unlimited PTO, which is like a whole other side of this like equation, right? Like it's not just related to like having a child, but just like how your companies approach paid time off in general, which is super different here than it is in most European countries, or honestly most countries in the world. My company had unlimited PTO, and so they were really cool with me just taking as much time as I needed. So I took a month, and that was like,
what does it mean then, limited? So just for us UK listeners, so we get days, we get holiday and we get our days off as part of our contract if we're full-time employment or contracted employment. So what does limited PTO mean versus non-limited PTO or unlimited
So
PTO or
yeah. So in most cases, like when you come on to a company, right? Like you sign, your offer letter. Now, sometimes at those companies, like you're given like a batch of paid time off days, right? Which is like sick days or vacation days. And it's usually like you get 14 days a year, something like that, right? Like you're guaranteed. And then as time goes on, as the longer that you work at the company, you over time accrue more PTO days.
right, yeah.
A lot of companies, you don't like get PTO days until you've been at the company for a certain amount of time. So it's like, okay, once you pass the 6-month mark, then you get a certain amount of days to do with what you want. And that's the traditional way of handling it. Like that's the approach, right? Like you get a limited number of days, and once those are out, if you take time off, then now you're making less money, right? Like they're eating into the hours that you actually work. Now a growing trend in the States, especially like in the technology space, I think, because like as startups come out and they're a little bit more progressive and it's a lot more competitive, they want to retain talent. They came out with some different policies. So it's really popular now here to have what's called unlimited PTO, meaning like they just wipe away the idea of accruing time or days off, and you can take as much time as you want as long as your supervisor or your manager, what have you, approves that. What's really interesting is that in a classic capitalistic fashion, like the reason that companies do that is that people actually take less time when they aren't accruing it, and it's not like something that goes away or that they have to earn. So they find that like, okay, I'll give you unlimited PTO, but most people just work through it. Haley and I haven't done that, which is we look at it, and both of us really value time away from the office to like produce better work and be more happy and excited about your job. So prior to the pandemic, we took regular time off. And in this case, like in the case of my daughter being born, I took a full 30 days paid, like didn't check in, didn't have to do anything, and I was covered. So that was really nice. I think again, that's like a luxury.
That's a great example, obviously, and it's I'm not saying lucky, but it's fantastic to have that much paid time off. But presumably someone in a very similar situation to you in a different team within the same company, if we're talking about those kind of companies, with a different manager, different management style, might say no to that 30-day time frame. So they might get 10 days off, you might get 30 days off. So that doesn't that cause some kind of conflict, internal conflict?
It does. And actually, without naming names or going too in depth, like that has played out from like a leadership and management perspective, right? Where different managers or different departments have different ideas of what they want to do. And also, the fact that for women, that time is like guaranteed, right? And the company has a formalized maternity leave policy saying like, okay, if you're a mother, you can get this much time off, and that's like very structured out in what's available. But for dads, it isn't. And so that is actually like, we've had a couple of dads like, approach our HR and, ask questions about why there isn't more equitability there, which is, really interesting, always when you're like kind of dealing with that. But I think, again, to kind of like go back to a previous idea, is that even the most progressive companies still have like these like very archaic notions of like parental roles and what people need. And so the company that I work for, again, I'm really fortunate, and they're very family friendly and very accommodating. And I think the instances where a manager is saying like, no, you can't take the time off, especially in the case of parenthood, is very few and far between. It does happen, and there are definitely people that subscribe to kind of those what I would call outdated ideals, and it's something that needs to be addressed and worked through, because it is for men especially, like it's a little bit more, I don't mean to like use a probably a purely American idiom, but it's like the Wild West, right? Like there's very little in terms of laws and rules, and it's just kind of like, you know, you do what you can and you get whatever you can. But yeah, and I think I'm trying to like remember back, and I apologize because it's been a while, but you know, there are I think like you can get like paid family leave from the state, where it's like they'll pay, even if you're not working in your company, is basically saying like, hey, we're not going to pay you for the time off. We'll give you 50% of your salary or whatever, you know, for a certain amount of time as like paid family leave. But it's like very minimal compared to what most women get, and you know, understandably so, right? Like the role of mother in, you know, in the early days is like way more intense and way more time and like emotionally taxing than for men. So like it's really good to have that. But
earlier obviously, and you know, the baby, you know, needs the mother for all kinds of physical, nutritional reasons. But I think what I'm seeing a lot more here is that fathers are taking their, you know, they're lucky compared to you guys, they're taking their 2 weeks off at the beginning, but then also because we can now have the shared parental leave is becoming a lot more common. So the mother and father can then share the leave. So actually, when the child is then 3 months old and actually is a bit more independent, and the mum can sort of step back a little bit, then that's when the father's taken the time off to spend time with the child when they are really, well, they can add more value, I suppose.
Totally.
That process.
Yeah, and I think you know, in a way that's kind of like the approach that I took the second time. And again, like I just found myself very fortunate that like I worked for a company and a boss who was like, yeah, that's totally fine, great, go for it. And I think if there were, you know, like formalized policies that allowed for that, that's probably what most people would do. What a lot of dads will do here, because again, like the state will guarantee, I believe it's 6 weeks of paid family leave. And so what a lot of dads will do is they'll take that initial 2 weeks, and then they basically bank those days, and you can use them at any like at any time you want. I think it's within the first year. So a lot of them will be like, okay, well, I'm going to then just take every Friday off, right? Like I have a 3-day weekend for the next year, and then I get a small like little reimbursement check from the state, you know, to cover that. So, and that's cool. You know, I think I kind of did that like all at once, which was really nice. But
And do you think
there's definitely ways to like game the system, you know, or not? I mean, not from like a financial perspective.
No, we won't say that publicly in case any any IRS are listening to you.
Double dip all day.
And then just talking about the traditional values you were saying, or the traditional notion of what a father is still quite prevalent in the US. Does that then translate into the social scene? So when you sort of, if you take in your experience, a cross section of the parents in California, is there still a big majority where the mums are stay-at-home mums, for example, or sort of what does the sort of makeup look like over there?
Well, I think that again, that probably changes like generation to generation, right? Like my parents, like almost all of the moms that like I grew up knowing were all stay-at-home moms, right? It was like single income families. I don't know of a couple that has kids right now where they like the mom is a stay-at-home mom. Like they're all dual income, you know, working families. Now some, like depending on you know, the situation or like what their goals are, or you know, like whatever, or maybe determine like whether or not that mom is working full-time. I think we have like a couple friends where the moms are working part-time, but there's not a single one where like the dad isn't like a full-time working dad. And I think that that's pretty, you know, like, again, a lot of that comes down to, you know, where like the age group that I fall into, I think we're like at the very beginning ends of like what would be deemed a millennial, you know, like the millennials.
I don't know about that. I'm way too old
it's
to be a millennial.
I don't know. Actually, like it goes earlier than you think. I think a lot of like millennials like start like very like maybe even like late 70s, early 80s. But
yeah, still 12. Never mind. Let's move on quickly.
sorry. It's 5 a.m. here, so I can't be held responsible for any rabbit holes that I start to go down. But yeah, I think now I totally lost my train of thought. But
We're just talking about the fact that there aren't really any stay-at-home dads.
yeah, oh
mums,
yeah, what I was saying is that
generational thing.
you know, yeah, I think, you know, if you, especially living in California, right? Like if you want to own a home, or good job, dude. He doesn't have a stuffy nose today. It's a big win for us. That's awesome, dude. Finally feeling better. Oh, he just rolled his eyes at me for whatever reason.
Already so young.
Oh my
Already
gosh,
rolling
so
his
much
eyes.
attitude, so much attitude. But yeah, again, like especially in California, if you want to own a home, for example, right, which is like a big milestone for you know, people kind of our age, that's like almost an impossibility without having like a dual income family. So I think just from like a financial perspective, and honestly, like probably trying to like live up to some notion of what success looks like. Oh, thanks, Steve. Haley apparently gave him cookies for breakfast, so
good. Yeah, that's good.
I might have to have an
Excellent way to
offline
start
conversation.
the day.
Just the chaos, right? You do what you can. You just do what you can. But yeah, I think you know, you're like trying to. Okay, dude, I'm still talking. Sorry, now you're gonna have to excuse me for eating a cookie at 6 o'clock in the morning. Oh, it's very stale too, so I have to wash that down. You know, there's these like notions of like what success means, like to my parents, right? And I grew up being fed those notions, right? Like, okay, to be successful, you have to have this job, you have to own a home, you have to do these things. And there's a lot of, in reality, right? Like there's a huge spectrum of like what success means to one person, and what your those values are, and what your goals are. But I think a lot of adults or parents, or you know, people like that I know, or that like, you know, grew up in the day and age that I did, they're trying to like meet some of these like, you know, ideals of success, and whether or not they're like happy or fulfilled, they like work themselves very hard to reach those goals. And again, like with, you know, California is very expensive. Are you just like chewing right in the microphone? I'm sorry.
Little ear, little nose coming just down to the corner.
Yeah. What, dude?
It's a little insight into Daniel's life.
Yeah. Well, he's also like very, very attached to me. So we have very. What was that?
Bike-a-thon.
Oh, bike-a-thon this week. Yeah.
No, 2 days.
Yeah, in 2 days. Hey, dude, I gotta finish this up, okay? Okay, I love you. You're gonna do great at your bike-a-thon. I know it. You're gonna be the fastest biker alive. Of course, I'll be there.
Oh, you're gonna be watching me.
I am gonna be watching you. Okay, cool. I'm gonna do this. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, cool. Now he's like a natural performer, so I think he sees that like anytime I'm on Zoom, he's like, dude, I can make these people laugh. Just wait.
In front of the screen.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so I think that's interesting. Like, and it kind of like presents a weird, like, you know, psyche for people, because they're like contending with reality, and then also like what they've been you know, kind of institutionalized with, from like, or indoctrinated with. Yeah.
And they feel they have to live.
And honestly, I think that's been, you know, like, to kind of fall back, or to kind of, you know, bring up a point earlier, like I think just being really flexible and being honest and open with your partner about that, and like what success means, it's been really helpful for us, because, you know, success for us is like getting through the day and having a good day, and being able to like, you know, look back and say, oh, thanks, man. You know, that we did the best we could, and we've been really fortunate that it's worked out pretty favorably for us. But
and you used the word earlier as values, obviously understanding what your family values are and what you all believe in together as a unit, and then whatever you do, you hopefully aligns with those values, and your, as I said, your success criteria will be different from your neighbours and the person down the road, and that's fine.
Yeah, Yeah, totally.
Yeah.